Good morning. How is everybody? All right, so here we are, moving ahead. And last time I talked about the autonomic nervous system. And we're basically kind of tying up loose ends with regards to the nervous system, right? And so we had said, we had talked about the brain and all the different brain regions and how they controlled physiology. And we had talked about the vagus nerve, and we had talked about the hypothalamus and the cerebrum. And we had talked about how you control physiology, right? Through all of these, including the amygdala, the emotional side of your brain. And now we're going to look at the sensory side of things. We had said the autonomic nervous system is that way that we're going to be sending outputs to your body organs, right? And now we're going to sort of talk about why, how you know what's going on around you. And so the chapter we're in is something called special senses. Now, in reality, we cover senses plus the special senses. So we talk about just regular afferent receptors, sensations, plus those specialized ones, the eyes, the ears, your sense of taste, your sense of smell, what else? Anyway, we'll talk about all of it. All right, so we have this chapter called Special Senses, and we start out by talking about, and this is on this slide here, sensation versus perception. And you might think of this as kind of one and the same, but the sensation is literally the impulse, the signal to your brain. And we had talked about how your brain then takes that signal and figures out what it means. I was talking to my sister yesterday, just last night, and she had been doing something where there was a glass shelf in her house, and she had bent over, and glass, you can see right through it. So because she didn't see it, she hit her head right between the eyes, and she saw stars. So the sensation was the impact and the signal to her brain, but she perceived it as stars. And why is that? We'll talk about the eye. The eye has photoreceptors. But when you get a jar to your head, you could have your eye inadvertently will send a signal to your brain as well. And so your brain says, my perception, that's what we're talking about. My perception is that it was light. So sensation is the signal, and how you interpret that signal is the perception. So when we talk about these afferent receptors, we have the whole bunch of different ones to talk about. And I'm going to show you the picture. Here they are. And so you can see we have for vision, we have rods and cones. Those are two of the receptor types. For hearing, we have what we call a hair cell. That's sort of the generic term for it. The sense of smell, we don't have a generic term for that, and we don't have a generic term for the sense of taste either. And then we have free nerve endings, and then those things like the Meissner's corpuscles and the Pacinian corpuscles that we had talked about early on in ANP1. So when we start with the most simple, we can talk about the free nerve endings. And the free nerve endings will send a signal to your brain when they're damaged. So they can send a signal when they're damaged, or when you experience a temperature that is above a certain temperature or below a certain temperature. And so the pain receptors are typically just free nerve endings, as are thermoreceptors. Now, we have mechanical receptors, which are going to give information about where you are in your location in space, is what we always say. So proprioception is, what position is my leg in, or my arm in, or my head, anything. And what it is it has to do with how much stretch there is in the receptor. And so when my arm is straight, the receptor in my elbow is not stretched, but then when I bend my arm, it stretches a receptor. And so even though I close my eyes, I know my arm is bent. So this is one of the kinds of stretch receptors. Now, in your heart, we have stretch receptors that are not giving you a position in space kind of information. Why would you have a stretch receptor in your heart? A hint to that would be the name, baroreceptor. Now, what does that sound like? Think. Sounds like a barometer, doesn't it? So what does a barometer measure? So you think, when I watched the weather on television, they talk about the barometric pressure. Pressure, right? So in your heart, you have blood pressure, and so you don't want that to be too high. A little bit is good, and even a lot when you're exercising isn't bad, but a real lot is bad. And so what can happen is you have baroreceptors in your heart that are monitoring pressure, and when they get stretched too much, your body says, okay, I've got to do something about this. Now, how would your body do something about the pressure in your heart? One of the ways is to get rid of some of the water that's in your blood so you can filter out more of the water. More of the water is removed. And the heart can stop beating and pushing quite so hard. That will also lower the pressure. So we have these mechanical receptors. Some of them are these things that are stretch receptors. When we talk about hearing, so with hearing, I said that we have hair cells, stereocilia is what they're called. And in lab, every one of us has done the lab on the ear. And when we talked about hearing, and it's actually the same when we talk about the sensations of movement, it has to do with hairs that get bent. And when they get bent, when we're talking about hearing, again, the perception depends on where it comes from. When we have the perception, when we sense that the hairs are bent, if it's in the cochlear duct, we'll learn about this stuff here in a little bit, but when it's in that inner ear, you'll say, oh, that's middle C. I'm a music person, and I know middle C when I hear it. When a certain group of hairs in your inner ear get bent, it tells you what frequency of sound is being sensed. Your perception would be middle C, right? So that's a mechanical receptor. It has to do with bending the hairs. Now, when you're feeling like you're upside down or going around a curve, those are also mechanical receptors, something very similar to this hair cell that is getting bent. Now, so we said we have mechanical receptors. We have the pain receptors that are just free nerve endings. And then we have what? What about? Or if I'm eating something really, really delicious, What am I sensing? Chemicals. Sense of smell and taste. So sense of smell is olfaction. The sense of taste is going to be gustation. That's one you probably haven't heard. But olfaction and gustation are going to be, you're going to be detecting chemicals either in the air or in the food that you eat. The final kind of receptor is the photoreceptors, and we have these photoreceptors, the rods and the cones. Rods are going to be detecting light. Cones are going to be detecting certain wavelengths of light. And they are, in both cases, they're detecting light. So what do we call them? Photoreceptors. Okay, isn't this fun? All right, so I've gone 11 minutes. We have covered through slide number 3, and we're going to come back and talk about the details of these things, starting with pain. Nociceptors. That is the term for a receptor associated with pain. Be right back.